Amid Aleph Masechet Bava Batra, and the Mishnah continues the discussion about when you buy something, what else you get along with it. So it says our Mishnah, we've of course had this before, and we're gonna, we already had many of these things foreshadowed. It says the Mishnah, Konesh Shnei Ilanot. Right? Let's say a person buys two trees in someone else's field. So he doesn't buy a whole field, he buys two specific trees. There's two orange trees. Toch Stei Chavera. It says the Mishnah, this is Rabbi Meir, Hareza, sorry, not Rabbi Meir. This is Tanakama, Hareza lo kanakarka. You do not get the ground around those trees. And we'll see the implication, of course, but presumably, let's say the trees die, you don't get to replant them. Rabbi Meir says, no, you are kona karka. So you are kona the land around the trees. There's a certain amount of land that's supported by the tree, and you acquire that as well. Says the Mishnah, so the consequence of this is that higdilu, if the tree grew, right, and it sort of grew and spread too far, so bigger than you would expect, lo yishapeh, you can't cut it down. I mean, you can't prune it. And normally, right, if someone owned land, like if I had a tree and I had land, and my tree grew into somebody else's property, right, they would have the right to cut it down. We've talked about this, or cut down the part that goes over my property or the other property. But here, because since the person who bought the tree, according to the Tanakhama, doesn't actually own the property, right, you can't say, oh, it grew over my property and therefore I wasn't expecting it. I didn't even own the property. So you gave me the rights to this tree. And whatever it does is okay. So you can't cut it down. The ha'olem min hageza, and that which grows out of the trunk, right, is shalom. It belongs to the owner of the tree. However, things that grow min hasharashim, this is why we're bringing this, things that grow out of the roots of the tree, meaning a new tree, let's say, pops up from the roots, that is shel balakarka. Because since the first person only purchased the tree and didn't purchase the ground around the tree, anything that grows from that ground, even from the roots of the tree, will belong to the balakarka. And continues the Mishnah, v'meito, and if the tree dies, you're done, right? Ein lo karka, you don't get to keep or replant the tree in the land that's there. And this, of course, is all according to the Tanakhama. Rabbi Meir would disagree with all of this, presumably. Continues the Mishnah, kanash shlosha, however, if you buy three trees, that's already considered to be a group of trees, and you're kana karka between them, right? You acquire the land. Since you acquire the land, higdilo, if the trees grow very tall, not really tall, but wide, and they spread out over they leave your land and they go over to the neighbor's land, you've got to cut them down. You've got to prune them. You shut that. You've got to cut them down or cut down the part that's hanging over the neighbor's land. That which grows out of the tree, the trunk, which is the geza, and the sharashim, the roots, shalo, belongs to the owner of the trees. They may do, and if the trees die, you own the land, so you can replant a new tree. Yeshlo karka. So that is the halacha of the Mishnah about the difference between whether you own the land or don't own the land. Says the Gemara, there's a very similar Mishnah in the Masechet Bikurim. Zan Hatam. We have a Mishnah there is referring to Bikurim, which talks about Hakonesh Shnei Ilanot B'toch Shel Chavero, right? There's halacha in Bikurim that you have to essentially own the land. You can't just buy the tree and buy the fruits. You have to own the land around it. So the Mishnah presumably says in Bikurim that if you purchase two trees, B'toch Shel Chavero, right, your friend has 50 orange trees and you buy two of them, then it's not clear if you should bring Bikurim or not. Because since you don't own the land under the trees, you only own the fruits, you might not have to bring Bikurim. So it says the Mishnah, Mevi ve'eno kore. You bring Bikurim to the Beit HaMikdash, but you don't read the whole psukim of Arami Oved Avi, right? The whole thing you're supposed to read. You can't read that. We'll see why in a little bit. Rabbi Meir says, no, because Rabbi Meir, of course, holds in our Mishnah that if you buy trees, you get the land. So then Mevi ve'kore. Then it's the same halacha as it would be in our Mishnah. You bring the Bikurim, and you can read the regular parsha because it's a real chiyuv d'oraita of Bikurim. Now, says Rav Yehuda, I'm Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel, what I can tell you is that not only would Rabbi Meir say that you have to bring Bikurim and read because you bought a tree and therefore you bought the land under it, I would say that Mechayev Hayu Rabbi Meir af lokech perot l'masha. Rabbi Meir is Mechayev you to bring Bikurim even if you go to the store and you buy perot. Right? If you go to the shuk, literally, and you buy perot that grew in Eretz Yisrael, we'll see, you'd have to bring bikurim from those perot. Now, which is much further in this halacha, right? Saying, even though you don't own the land, you don't even own the tree, you just own the fruit, you have to bring bikurim. How does Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel know this halacha? So says Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel, it's midiktani Mishnah Yitera. It's the fact that we have a second Mishnah that essentially tells you the exact same thing as the first Mishnah. There's a Mishnah in Bava Batra, talks about ownership. There's a Mishnah in Bikurim that talks about Bikurim, and they say the same thing. So Michti, the Nale, the Yishlo Karka, right? Our Mishnah already said that Rabbi Meir holds that if you buy a tree, you get the land. So obviously, Pshita, the Meviva Koreh, it's obvious if you own a land, you own a tree, and it grows fruit, you have to bring Bikurim. So you bring it and you read, right? Ella Shema Mina, you see from the fact that the Tana repeated the halacha basically and said it in the name of Rabbi Meir twice, that in fact Rabbi Meir says you bring it even if you don't own the land. Mechayev haya Rabbi Meir af delokeach perot min hashuk. Rabbi Meir is mechayev you even if you go to the street and the shuk and buy perot, you don't even own the land, right? And so here basically what Rabbi Meir was saying, that's how he understands it, is that the Chachamim said, oh, you don't own the land, and therefore you can bring Bikurim, but you can't read the Psukim. Says Rabbi Meir, I personally hold you own the land, but I don't even care. Even according to you that you don't own the land, I hold that you bring Bikurim and read it. Ask Gemara how, I understand that's his opinion, but how does he deal with the Psukim? Achtiv, right? The whole reason we ask this question is because the Pasuk says, coming up very soon, Asher tavi mi artzicha. You bring it fruit from your land. Doesn't he bring fruit from your tree, right? And you bring fruit from your land. Says Gemara, you're right. It does say that, but that's not to say your land that you personally own. It's meant to say artzicha, meaning land that's owned by the Jewish people, so to speak, but but to exclude land that exclude fruit, that grew outside of Eretz Yisrael. So there, even if you own a tree in America and you grow fruits in it, you don't have to bring bikurim. Well, that's not a chiddush because it already said your land, your adama, right? Your earth, basically. So that seems to exclude adama that's outside of Eretz Yisrael. No, that is not. That is needed for something else. That is lemute admat goy. That's to exclude that if a non-Jew owns land in Eretz Yisrael, right, in Eretz Canaan or Eretz Yisrael, and grows fruit, and you buy the fruit from the non-Jew, you don't have to bring bikurim on that fruit, because even though it grew in Eretz Yisrael, it didn't grow on admatcha. So it has to be both Jewish-owned land and it has to be in Eretz Yisrael. It says, okay, but the pasuk says that when you bring bikurim, you say asher natatali, right? You say, thank you, Hashem, for giving me this fruit from the land that you gave me, right? So obviously, if you buy fruit that was grown by a non-Jew, you can't say the land which you gave me. Doesn't matter. Well, that's not what asher natatali means. Natatali doesn't mean you gave me the land. It means you gave me the financial ability to buy fruit, right? The yavti li zuzi, you gave me the means to have money, vizafnibo, and I bought it, right? So you're thanking Hashem for giving me the resources to get this fruit. That doesn't mean for giving me the land. So from asher natatali alone, you wouldn't know that it has to be your own land, right? And in fact, our Gemara seems to be concluding that it's machloket, right? About whether you have to own the land, which is what the Chachamim seem to say, or according to Rabbi Meir, you don't even have to own the land. Now, on the other hand, it does have to be from Eretz Yisrael. It can't be from Chutz La'aretz, and it can't be from the land of the non-Jew, right? So it has to be Jewishly owned, Eretz Yisrael. But according to Rabbi Meir, if you buy that fruit, you still have to bring bikurim if it's the first fruits. Okay, so that is sort of the reading of our Mishnah and Mishnah in bikurim. Ask the Gemara now, Mativ Rav. Says Rava, okay, it's a very nice explanation, but I got a little problem from the following Braita. We're 4 lines in the bottom. Says the Braita, Hakoneh ilan echad b'toch shel chaveiro. Right? A person brings, we're talking here about bikurim. A person buys one tree within a field that's owned by his friend. Okay, so that, of course, the Mishnah in bikurim implied that in that case, according to the Chachamim, you would, we'll see. Says the Braita, let me read the Braita and then we'll talk about it. Says the Braita, Mevi ve'ino kore. Then you bring bikurim, but you can't read the psukim. Why? Lefi shelo kana karka, because you didn't buy the land around the tree. Divrei Rabbi Meir. So we've been saying this whole time that Rabbi Meir says that you don't need to own the land in order to bring it, and that's why Rabbi Meir said a second Mishnah. So you see clearly from here that that's a mistake. that opinion that we quoted earlier from Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel, which was that the reason the Mishnah is repeated is to tell you that Rabbi Meir holds you don't even need the land, is wrong. The reason that Rabbi Meir said in the Mishnah Bikurim that you bring Bikurim is because he holds that if you buy 2 trees, you also buy the land around them. But Rabbi Meir is clearly teaching us here that if you buy 1 tree, you don't necessarily buy the land around. So according to Rabbi Meir and everybody, 1 tree, you can't bring Bikurim and read it. You can bring it, you can't read the Psukim. If you buy 2 trees, Rabbi Meir says you own the land and therefore you bring Bikurim and read. And the Chachamim say you don't read. And 3 trees, everyone agrees that you purchase the land. So that's where we seem to conclude from this other bright. Now, says the Gemara, let's get a little bit deeper into the question of what does it mean that you bring it and you don't read? So let's clarify that. It says the Gemara, in the bottom line of Pei Aleph Amud Aleph. Amar lo Rabbi Shimon ben Eliakim Rabbi Elazar. Rabbi Shimon ben Eliakim asked Rabbi Elazar the following question. My taima to Rabbi Meir the Ilan Echad. Right? Rabbi Meir says that by 2 trees you bring it and you read because he holds by 2 trees that you own the land. But by 1 tree, he says you can bring Bikurim, but you can't read the verses, the Psukim. And of course, the Chachamim said that about 2 trees. My time at Rabbanan b'shnei ilanot. Right. So, what is the rationale for saying that you can bring Bikurim, but you can't read the Psukim? So Amarlo, so he responded to him and he said, "Whoa, it's a really, really challenging question, right?" Davar, this is what Rabbi Elazar said. Davar shaharishonim lo amru tam. You have something where we have no authorities, right? No earlier people said a reason for this, right? So I'm going to read inside. My time Rabbi Meir bilan echad. We are, I don't know, Ken, if you're with me. So we're already up to the top of Pei Aleph Amud Bet, which is pretty far, halfway through the daf, the short daf. But basically, just to review, our Mishnah talked about buying a tree and whether you buy the land around it. So we brought this Mishnah in Bikurim. Bikurim is, of course, the first fruits that you bring to the Beit HaMikdash from your tree. You bring it to the Beit HaMikdash, you give it to the Kohen, you say Psukim in the Torah, Arami Oved Avi, and I went out to Mitzrayim and I came out, and thank you Hashem for giving me all this. And then the Kohen eats the Bikurim, right? So the question was, what if you don't own the land around your tree, right? So if you own the land around the tree, then you bring Bikurim like regular. If you don't own the land around the tree, or we're not sure about that, right? So in the case where you purchased 1 tree, according to Rabbi Meir, or 2 trees, according to the Chachamim, so you presumably don't own the land around them, they said in the Braita, or in the Mishnah actually, that you bring Bikurim, but you don't read the Psukim. So he asked him what was the reason for that. And his Rabbi Elazar's response was, I have no idea. Right? You had to ask me this question in front of everybody in the Beit HaMidrash to embarrass me because I don't know the reason. Right? That was really not cool. Right? I have no way of knowing it. Or I don't know a good answer. Now, it says Rabbah, I don't really understand the big question here. Amar Rabbah, said Rabbah, 4th line from the top of Pei Aleph on the bet, my kushya. Why is it so complicated? Why can't it just be that it's a suffix, right? Dilma Rabbi Meir bi'ilan echad stafuki misafkale. That Rabbi Meir is unsure. When you buy a tree, do you also buy the land around the tree? So Rabbi Meir says, for sure, if you buy 2 trees, you buy the land around them. The Chachamim say, for sure, if you buy 3 trees, you buy the land around them. But what if it's fewer number, right? So maybe they're not sure. So when you're purchasing it, of course, you don't get things unless you can prove you got them. But by Bikurim, we don't know. So bring the Bikurim misafek, but you can't read the Psukim. We'll see why in a minute you can't read the Psukim. But you don't read the Psukim, but you can bring Bikurim, and it's just a suffix. So says the Gemara, what's the big question? Dilma Rabbi Meir bilan echad tzvukim misafkele. Maybe Rabbi Meir, when you purchased 1 tree, he was unsure if you also purchased the land with it. The Rabbanan b'shnei ilanot tzvukim misafkele. And the Rabbanan were unsure when you buy 2 trees, whether you buy the land around them. And therefore, since we don't know, bring the Bikurim misafek, let the Kohen keep it. But of course, you can't read the Psukim. We'll see why. But you can't read the Psukim because you don't know for sure if it's Bikurim. So it says Rabban, we'll see why it's such a complicated thing.
And he owns the tree, right? He bought the tree. We had a Gemara a week ago, 2 weeks ago, where a person bought land inside land or a house within the bigger house. And then we had to come up with all kinds of ways that the other person could get to that inner part, because could he fly there? Could he jump there? And was it ba'ayin tova, ayin lo ra, ayin ra, whether he was allowed to enter, was part of the deal or not? But in essence, the Maisa, he owns that inner section for whatever way he got it. Now he got, but he owns it. So this person, he owns the tree. So let him be. He owns the tree. So give bikurim and say the pesukim on the tree he owns. It doesn't matter if he owns the land.
It's a great question. Ken, you missed the first part of the daf. So there's a machloket. Everyone agrees if you buy a tree, you bought the tree, right? There's a machloket about whether if you don't say anything, you also bought the land around the tree. And the implication, our Mishnah said, you'll listen to the recording, I hope. The Mishnah said the implication is, let's say the tree dies, right? Can you replant a tree in that space? So if you just bought the tree and the tree dies, then you're done. But if you bought the tree and the land around it and the tree dies, you can plant a new tree in that land. The halacha for bikurim that we said in Amud Aleph is that you not only have to own the tree, you have to own artzecha. You have to own the land around the tree. Okay, so it's not enough to own a tree, you have to own the land. Everybody agrees that if you buy 3 trees and you don't say anything specific, that you bought them as a cluster and you bought all the land under those trees. And then you for sure can bring bikurim. But if you just buy 1, or if you just, according to Rabbi Meir, or you just buy 2, according to the Chachamim, then the Mishnah and the Braita said that you bring bikurim, but you don't read the psukim. So Rabbah now says, well, I think I know why. It's because we're not sure if you bought the land. So it's a safek. Says Gemara, but it's not a safek. Is it a safek, right? Our Mishnah said, going back to this was actually the Braita we just quoted, Hakatani, the Braita said, the Rabbi Meir says, if you bought 1 tree, you bring bikurim, and you don't read, now we're quoting, lefi shelo kana karka, because you didn't buy the land. That's not a safek. That's different Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir is saying, you didn't buy the land. He's going, no, that's not what it means. Ema, it means maybe, meaning you didn't definitively buy the land, right? Shema lo kana karka. So we're back to the original place where essentially Rabbah is saying that the reason that Rabbi Meir says you bring bikurim and don't read the psukim, right? And the reason the Chachamim say by 2 trees you bring bikurim and don't read the psukim is because there's a suffix. So this might be chayiv in bikurim and it might not be. So misafek, bring it to the Beit HaMikdash and give it to the Kohen. Says the Gemara, but how in the world can you do that if it's just a safek? Leichesh dumalav bikurim ninhu. Why don't you have to worry that maybe it's not bikurim? You don't own the land, and therefore the fruits you're bringing to the Beit HaMikdash is a big, beautiful basket of fruit that is not bikurim. Okay, and what's wrong with that? Kama ayon chulin azara. You're bringing something that's chulin, that's not really bikurim, into the azara. You're not allowed to bring something that's chulin into the azara. Tosas here points out, and he's done this, I think we've had this discussion before, what does that mean? You can't bring an apple into the azara and eat an apple if you're a Kohen? Or as Gemara talks about, you can't bring mustard in and put it on top of your carbon, right, to have a good sandwich. So Tosas makes the point here, this is a matter of a lot of debate, but Tosas's point here is that you're bringing this as a religious ceremony, right? You're bringing this as bikurim, which you bring to the Mizbeach, you do hagashat to the Mizbeach, and tenufa, right? So those are things where you're basically acting like it's a karban or like it's a gift to Hashem. That's a problem, right? If you just brought an apple in and you wanted to eat an apple, that wouldn't necessarily be a problem. But here, what you essentially are doing is you're bringing something as if it's bikurim, but maybe it's not. And if it's not, then you have a risk that you're bringing something chulin as a avodah in the mizbeach, so in the azara. So that would be a problem. So ask the Gemara, how can you say misafek? You're not sure, so just bring it. If you bring it, you might be doing something really wrong. Says
so
Gemara,
isn't there a case we could say, we go the suffix lahakil? If we're not even sure that it's bikurim, then don't bring it at all. Just bring it, eat it at home.
Right, but then it might be bikurim, and then you're over a really big prohibition of not bringing bikurim.
Is it a lav? Is it a lav? Is it a mitzvah aseh?
It's a mitzvah aseh to bring bikurim.
So he's not over a lav then.
Correct, but he's got to bring bikurim. So the problem is, if you come bring it just in case, that might be a big problem. It says when you're right, what has to happen is this guy is not sure, right? He owns 1 tree. He's got fruits from the tree. He is not sure if he should bring them or not bring them. So he brings them, but he's mikadesh lahu. He makes them hektish. So he says, look, I think this is bikurim. just in case it's not Bikurim, on condition it's not Bikurim, I want to give it as a gift to Hektish. And then either way, it belongs to the Beit HaMikdash. And so therefore, you're not bringing Chulin Lazar. That's a very good solution, except that you remember at the end of the day, the Kohen takes the Bikurim home and eats it, right? And if it belongs to Hektish, you can't eat things that belong to Hektish. Ask the Gemara, the Kohen has to eat the Bikurim, right? And just you're right, but the Paraglo, because you redeem it, right? So you basically give it to Hektish, and then you bring the Bikurim, bring it to them, and then you pay Hektish the money, plus a fifth probably, to redeem it, and then give it to the Kohen to eat. Okay, well, that solves some of the problem. But remember, Dilma lav bikurim ninu. What if it's not bikurim and kamafkelu mitruma o maaser, right? You normally, if you have 100 fruits, you got to give two to the Kohen and 10 to the Levi is truma and maaser. If they're bikurim, you don't give any truma and maaser. The whole thing goes to the Beit HaMikdash, right? It's like tax deductible. But here, basically, you're going to bring your 100 fruits to the Beit HaMikdash, but you're stiffing the Kohanim and the Leviim of their truma and maaser. Says, well, you're right. Well, what you should do is you should be mafresh. You should take off truma and maaser from this bikurim. So basically, bring it all as bikurim to the Beit HaMikdash, then take off truma and take off maaser. Is where 1 second. Bishlama truma gedola. I understand the truma gedola, which is that first 150, right? Yavle the kohen. So that's fine because it's going to go to the kohen anyways. The kohen's going to get the bikurim and it's going to get the truma. Maaser sheni nami, right? What about maaser sheni? Remember in the first, second, fourth, and fifth year, you have to bring a maaser sheni. That too, you can yavle the kohen. Remember, maaser sheni, anyone can eat maaser sheni as long as it's in Yerushalayim, right? So you give that as a gift to the kohen as well. So that's fine. Maaser ani, remember in the third and the sixth year of the cycle, they had to take off maaser ani, but that's easy. You just choose a kohen who's poor, right? Yavle the kohen ani. But the problem is, what about maaser rishon, which has to go to a Levi, right? The maaser rishon goes to a Levi. And the Levi obviously can't eat bikurim because he's not a kohen. So you have this big basket of bikurim. You want to bring it to them. You want to first say, just in case it's not bikurim, I make it hektish, right? And then you say, and I'm going to give it all to the kohen, but I'm going to separate this portion as truma, and this portion is maaser, and this portion is maaser sheni, and give it all to the kohen. But the maaser rishon part doesn't belong to the kohen, right? So ask the Gemara, maaser rishon to Levihu, that belongs to the Levi. Leman yavle, who are you going to give it to? Answers the Gemara, well, thankfully, we've got a way out because sometimes, remember, we've had this many times before. You can give maaser rishon to a kohen. The Yoav leid lekohen ki Reb Elazar ben Azariah. The Tanyas we've learned in the Breita, truma gedola, the first truma, the main truma, goes to the kohen. The maaser rishon goes to the Levi. Divrei Rabbi Akiva, but Reb Elazar ben Azariah Omer maaser rishon. There's a lot of different girsot here, but I'm going to read what we have in front of us. Maaser rishon af lekohen. Right, that you can even give maaser rishon can go to a Levi, but a kohen. Remember, as we've talked many times, 24 places. A kohen is called a Levi.
The kohen is called a Levi.
Yeah. So therefore, a kohen is included, and therefore, basically, you are giving everything to the kohen, and essentially, you're saying, I don't know what this is exactly. It might be bikurim, and then everything's easy, right? It might not be bikurim. In which case, I make it as a gift to hektish, and I separate truma, and I separate maaser, and I separate the other maaser, and I give it all to the kohen to enjoy, as is his right to get truma and maaser. Now, of course, he'd have to have kedusha of truma, right, and eat it the right way, etc. Says the Gemara, that seems like a very convoluted thing, but we've seen crazier, right? But ask the Gemara, 7 lines from the bottom, but maybe it is bikurim, right? You have a doubt. Sorry, can you guys hear me? Sorry, yeah. I'm good again? Yeah, okay, thank you, Mary. So ask the Gemara now, 7 lines from the bottom. Maybe, in fact, right, this produce of one tree according to Rabbi Meir, or two trees according to the Chachamim, is bikurim minhu. And of course, if it's bikurim, the Torah says, bring your bikurim to the Beit HaMikdash and read this whole passage. So boi kriya. And you're not, and the Mishnah said, the Mishnah said you're not allowed to read. But how can you bring bikurim if you can't read? Says the Gemara, well, kriya lo ma'akevet. Of course, you're supposed to read, but reading is not an essential part of the mitzvah. If you do bikurim and you don't read, you're yotzei. Says the Gemara, 1 second, right? Remember, and this is also a very fascinating concept we've had many times, that there is a concept that there are many things that are not ma'akev. Right? Torah says to do something, but you don't have to do it. However, Rabbi Zera has a principle that we're about to read, that that's only true if you could do the thing, right? If you had the possibility of doing this action and you didn't do it, it's not ma'akev. But if you couldn't do the action, then it is ma'akev. And here, you can't do the action. Why can't you do it? Because you're not allowed to read the psukim. So since you're not allowed to read the psukim, maybe it's ma'akev in this case. And what is the case of Rabbi Zera? Again, very famous and interesting case. Right? The Torah says that when you bring a karban mincha, you have to put together the flour and the oil, and you have to mix them together, right? Now, we learn that usually if you skip that step, if you don't mix them together, you're still okay. The mincha is not bila, which is what mixing means. Mixing means is the word for mixing, right? Is not ma'akev. However, if you, let's say, have too much flour, meaning you put 60 portions in a big bowl and you can't mix it because it's not physically possible, then it's not kosher because bila is ma'akev when you can't do it. So let's read that inside. Below, it says, where is it true that it's not ma'akev? Well, I'm a Rabbi Zera. Rabbi Zera said that kol ha'ra'oi lebila, any mixture of flour and oil, or water, but flour and oil in this case, that is suitable to be mixed, meaning it's possible to mix it. If you didn't mix it or didn't mix it well, ein bila ma'akevet though. The mixing step is not ma'akev in karban mincha. However, she'eno ra'oi lebila, if it's impossible to mix it because you put too much flour in, then bila is ma'akevet though. So according to that principle, right, then it would be a problem here too. Because even though reading the psukim of the bikurim are not ma'akev, in this case, it's impossible for you to read the psukim because, we'll see why in a second, but it's impossible because you don't know for sure if this is chayav. Now, as we're going to see later, why, when you don't know for sure if you're supposed to bring bikurim, you're not allowed to read the psukim. Says Gemara, well, there's a way out of it, because you can do the avad like Rabbi Yossi bar Chanina. You can do what Rabbi Yossi bar Chanina mentioned, who said, the Amar, he says, that if a person is batzran, person harvests the fruit from their tree, they can't make it to Yerushalayim for bikurim, so they send it with a shliach. The shigran biyad shliach. They ask, their messenger, you're going up to Yerushalayim for Sukkot, bring my bikurim, please, for me. If that happens, and umeit shaliach baderach, and then the shliach dies on the way, right? Then, and you basically appoint a new shliach, then mevi ve'eno koreh. Then you can bring the bikurim because they are real bikurim, but you can't read the psukim. Why can't you read the psukim? My time, because it says v'lakachta v'haveta. You brought it and you took it. I guess is v'lakachta v'haveta, and you brought it. Meaning you took it from the field and you brought it to the Beit HaMikdash. But turn the page, or turn to the top. Right, Pei Bet Amud Aleph. It requires ad shetehei likicha ba'ava'ah ke'echad. There has to be taking it and bringing it together by the same person. And if you have two different people doing that, then you can't read the psukim. Okay?
But don't we say shaliach kamoto? That therefore, if he were to replace his shaliach, he's like the same, right? Shaliach kamoto.
So not in this case. Adam kamoto is what you mean. Yeah, but not in this case. So here, now, of course, no one's suggesting that you should kill your shliach, right, in order to avoid saying the bracha. But you could basically give one shliach, give it to another shliach, let's say, right? And then, of course, there would not be a chiyuv to do the reading. So because you need l'kicha v'avak yachad, haleka, therefore, so you have this really complicated case where you have a suffix whether your fruit is chayiv and bikurim. You have to send it up, but you have to first make it hektish. You have to take off truma and maser. You have to give it to a shliach who gives it to another shliach, so that nobody has to read the psukim, and it is kosher. Says the Gemara, top of Pei Bet Amud Aleph, the thing that you've probably all been thinking the whole time. Amali Ravacha Brei Rav Avia, the Ravashi, second line. Said Ravacha Brei Rav Avia to Ravashi, who the heck cares? Why can't you just read the psukim, right? Nichti, psuki ninu. Right? You go with your bikurim to Beit HaMikdash. You only read psukim that are quoted in the Torah, right? From next week's parsha. So just read the psukim. Likri. Why can't you get up and read the psukim the way you read Shema or something? What's the damage in terms of saying? Why did the Chachamim say you bring the bikurim, but you're not allowed to read the psukim? So what's the big deal? Amalei said, well, it's mishum tenichsi keshikra. It's one thing if you're reading the Torah, you're just reading the Torah. But here you're making it sound like I am bringing this up because this is my bikurim, and that might not be true, right? You're making a very definitive kind of statement about what these are when, in fact, you have no idea what they are. So they wouldn't ask you to do something like that, which basically is looking like you're false. You're basically making things up. That's one problem. Rav Misharshia, Rav Chia says, no, I have a different problem because I'm worried. Dilma ati lafke inu mitruma umaser. You might forget, right? Because you went through the whole ceremony and all you'll remember is, oh, I own one tree. Last year I brought bikurim. Next year I bring bikurim. You might forget that they're not really bikurim. And since you're going to forget that they're not really, or they're not certainly bikurim, maybe you won't bring truma and maser, which of course could be in a sudoraita. And so because of that, we don't want you to go through the motion and pretend that they are bikurim, because you're gonna either, it's a debate about whether you're gonna make a mistake next year or somebody else will watch you and make a mistake and say, oh, he had one tree, he brought bikurim, he read it, it must really be bikurim. But either way, Chazal were worried that if you bring the bikurim regularly and read it regularly, that you will think that this is really chayiv in bikurim and make a mistake. And therefore, because it's a suffix, because we don't know, they instituted this special halacha that you bring the bikurim, but you're not allowed to read the psukim, and therefore we led to all the other problems that we had. So that is, just to be clear, a side point, right? Remember, the point of our Mishnah, which we're going to continue tomorrow morning, is about when you sell a tree, what happens, if you sell the ground or don't sell the ground with it. But obviously, it has very strong implications, as we learned today, for bikurim as well. So we will stop there. And I don't know, Miriam, so tomorrow morning you're not able to join us? Okay, so we'll miss you. But we are learning tomorrow morning at 7:45 a.m. We'll pick it up from the two dots on Paybat Amud Aleph.
So that said, Higdilu.
Following two Zooms at the same time yet.
No, it's very hard. Yeah, we will start at Higdilu tomorrow. Okay.
My issue is starting late. I'm in the end of the Eastern time zone, so Shabbat doesn't end here till 8:30, almost 8:40.
Oh, sorry. Where are you?
In Michigan.
Got it.
So it's about 45 minutes later. It's candlelight.
Got it.
So
okay.
the same thing next week. So I'm
okay starting later. Let's just if you put the times in the chat, we'll make sure it works for everyone.
It would just be about 10 minutes later, probably. Then you're starting.
That's not a problem for me, but let's put it in the chat and just make sure there's no one who has strong objections.
All right, thank you.
But tomorrow morning, 7:45. Okay. Good night, Mary.
Shavua tov.
Good night, Ken. Shavua tov.